Hi there, my name is Lou Wieland, and for the last 30 years, I have published the official relocation guides on Atlanta that are distributed by the First Multiple Listing Service of Atlanta. There are publications for the metro area, one for North Fulton, one for Cobb, and one for Gwinnett, and they are distributed by the FMLS. They're in the stores, FMLS 3 stores. We place them at all the realtor offices for agents to give out to clients. They are full of information about the area, schools, and medical service providers. We profile all the counties and communities. They're on my website also, atlantacommunityprofiles.com. They're also on the FMLS website for the benefit of realtors. And I'm also a commercial agent with KW Commercial, and my focus is multifamily, land, and office. If I can help you, please let me know. I'll be happy to provide information for you. And my email address is lou.wieland@kw.com or lou@communityprofiles.net, either one, whichever. But be happy to be of assistance to you, and would like to upfront thank Donna Davis of Pro Video Talent for producing this show. And every week we interview community and business and government leaders, and we are extremely happy to once again have Lynn Dempsey back, who is the commissioner of the Georgia Real Estate Commission and president of the Appraisal Board. And he's been on our show quite a few times this year, and we're looking forward to having him back next year to have some really cool shows. And a lot of focus on, we talked earlier about the Savannah Port Authority and their phenomenally growing importance to our economy, especially with people buying more, with more imports than ever. And I understand now they're even adding another area for receiving cargo ships down in Savannah. But anyway, we'll have that and a lot of commercial agents and leaders together with Lynn. And thanks for coming back on the show, Lynn. And Jeff Ledford, welcome to the show for the first time. Jeff is Chief Advocacy Officer of Government Affairs for the Georgia Association of Realtors. And before that, he was 23 years in state government as a state ethics commissioner, then as Georgia's third real estate commissioner, and then at the Georgia Department of Economic Development. He's has standing columns in industry publications. He was Atlanta Business Chronicle and Who's Who in Finance, and he's a graduate of Georgia State and an active foster parent, and resides in Kennesaw with his wife and 6 of his 8 children. So, Jeffrey, you're a busy guy. 8 children. I don't know how you do that, but just the thought of it makes me want to take a nap. I don't know how you do it, but anyway, great to have you, Jeff. Appreciate your taking time. I know you're at a meeting right now, but wanted to just, we're going to spend a little bit of time asking you some questions. And one of the questions that, we're constantly focusing on, of course, and is under the microscope on Lynn's watch, is emerging trends. And that's pretty wide open topic, but Jeff, how would you want to address that? What are some of the emerging trends?
Sure. I appreciate you having me on, and I was excited when Lynn called and asked if I'd join him on this one. So I would have to say, when you're looking at the emerging trends, what we're looking at are what are the things that may cause us to have to look at, is the law currently working for what we're seeing happening? Is the commission exists for the protection of the public interest? The laws are in place so that we, again, have a protection of the public interest. That's for the practitioners and for the public. We're seeing that in the current environment, it has been ripe for certain predatory practices. And we're seeing where individuals may not understand that they are binding themselves to perhaps a long-term contract that ultimately, comes back and it hits them years later. It's a type of business model that we were seeing emerge just over the past 2 years, that it puts a lien on the property if you're not going to engage this company in selling your home, and that would be binding to all future owners of that property for the next X number of years out, decades out. That's one of them. We're also seeing where people are being approached. They may have some problems with their house. They may just be in an older house, but they're being told that if you sign here, this will be a program that can help you, pay for a new roof or get something else or whatever it may be, or that there are going to be so many problems coming up with your house. Now's a good time to sell it, and I will buy it from you. And what's really happening is it's almost a theft of the equity that these people have in that house when that's happening. Much of what's going on may already be illegal because it's some of these practices are there's a bit of fraudulent activity with it. It's definitely misrepresenting, but it's very difficult to ferret out the legitimate activity, because with each one of those things I've mentioned, there may be a legitimate reason I want to have a long-term engagement with someone. Perhaps it's a property management deal. Perhaps it's a commercial deal. I may want to sell my home to a legitimate investor, or I may want to, tap into some equity in my home to get repairs. But when I, as a consumer, am being misled as to what's going on, and I end up potentially losing my home or selling it for, half the value it could be, that's where we see that there's a problem that might need to be better addressed in a different way. I think if you look at the laws we have, and whether it's license law, whether it's Beretta, whether it is just general consumer protections that are in place, as times change, we need to go back and revisit to see, is the law still doing what it needs to? I know Lynn deals with this on a regular basis, and in my time at the commission, you had to constantly revisit. There would be new trends. New trends are not necessarily bad. That's growth. That's how the industry changes and grows. My mom sold real estate, and the main focus of the practice when she was doing it was she had the paper MLS books, and she would have the paper maps. She knew how to get everywhere, and she knew what was for sale. Now that's not the issue. The real value in hiring a professional is they know the process, and it's a very complicated and scary process for the consumer. So being certain that the laws are keeping pace with all the changes around us, I kind of refer to it a lot as it's a constantly evolving stew. There are changes in other laws, in federal law. There are going to be changes in technology. The way we functioned 50 years ago is not going to be the way we function now, nor even 10 years back. So there's always got to be a reevaluation of what's working and what's not.
Have you had any experience with that, Lynn? I know Jeff said you're something that's under your microscope all the time.
I would add to that and join you in saying hi to Jeff and thank you for all that he does. Just try to imagine how trends have emerged and how things have changed when we look at how we advertise using the internet, using our phones, using things that weren't even imagined 10 years ago. And Jeff mentioned 10 years. Everything has changed so much over the last 10 years. And there are different configurations of offices as teams have come about. We've touched on that, Lou. It's just amazing how offices are organized, or different forms of organizations for offices have been tried, and we've had to look into some of that. So it's very real and very interesting what he's talking about. Emerging trends is a great way to put that, I think, because so much has changed and is continuing to change and will continue to change.
What about investors' involvement in purchasing single-family detached and attached housing? I saw a article recently where somebody was advocating limiting the number of individual single-family detached homes any single investor could buy. Is there any truth to that or substance to it?
I would say it is something that has grown in conversation over the past couple of years. The way I would describe the issue is that is not necessarily the problem. It may be a concern of some people. It may be a problematic issue for some. But the true problem is that we, for the past, probably the past 15, 20 years, have not been able to meet the demand. So our supply of housing is grossly inadequate. If you look at the metropolitan areas around the country, where you're seeing a great increase in investor-owned properties, Atlanta is among the top. But if you look at what's common among those areas, it's the inadequate supply. For the past decade, we have been attracting new investment in the state in companies moving here. Our Department of Economic Development has done a wonderful job of attracting companies not just to Atlanta, but to all parts of the state. And we're seeing a significant increase in the number of jobs being able to be offered to our citizens. We have one of the best training systems as far as our Quick Start program and our technical college system to get employees trained. The problem is we don't have enough space for them to live. If you look at what we are projecting to see in the next 10 to 20 years, it's going to be exponential growth of our population. And we're already there. When you look at the biggest conversations on housing really have been on what's been called workforce housing. That's not always a starter home. It could be. But it means are people that are going to be working able to live near where they're going to work? I think you see it in our traffic problems. The amount that has had to happen in on our interstate system. I live on the north in one of the northern suburbs, and the express lanes that have been built, the ways to accommodate increased traffic, is a direct result of people are driving several counties away to be able to work. If we could catch up with supply, I think one of the more recent numbers I heard was that in Atlanta alone, we are 72,000 dwellings deficient. If we could start to catch up there, then you wouldn't see as much focus on investors coming in. And not that that's necessarily a bad thing, but you wouldn't see where it's being viewed as a takeover, as investors are taking too much. The reason that's the case is because there's money to be made. The rents have been rising, not because the investors are raising it. That's why the investors are coming, is because the rents are on a slate to continue rising because of demand. There's a much greater demand than we can meet right now. And the same holds true for sales. If you look at what the demand is, it is for what we're not building anymore. I heard this said a couple of years ago that we are building what the baby boomers wanted 10 and 15 years ago. And the baby boomers are now downsizing, and they want something smaller and easier to take care of. The next largest population group are the 20-somethings. What do they want? They want a starter home. And so we have the two largest population groups buying for the same type of property, which is smaller easier to take care of, more in town, closer to restaurants and activities. If you were to look at, market data, I know in one of the in a recent meeting I was at up in the mountains, was looking at the county. The increase in price of a 4 to 5 bedroom house was about 20%, 25%, maybe 15% as you went higher up to the 6 bedrooms. As you went down to 1 and 2 bedrooms, I think the biggest number I saw was 125% increase over the previous year, the price. And it was because they're not available. The amount of 1 and 2 bedroom townhomes that had been built in that county, you'd have to go back 20 years to find the most recent construction on it. It only made up for 3% of what was available. But that was where their highest demand was. You had people that were moving there that were in their early to mid 20s, getting good jobs in healthcare, in tourism, but they were unable to find something because, again, when you look at the minimum sizes that had been allowed to be constructed over the past 15 years, that was simply not an option anymore. And so as we're building for what we think people want, or as we're setting rules that are regulating what people have to build, you have to build something that's at least this size on at least this amount of land, we're only contributing to a greater crisis of a lack of supply. And so
there's a housing study committee at this time. Tell us a little bit about that and what we should know.
Sure. So this past session, the House passed an access to housing study committee. It was chaired by Dale Washburn. He's out of House District 141, which is down in the Macon area. He is a commercial realtor, and I believe the hearings were held before. I want to say it was in October and September, and so just about now, I think now the report should be coming out any day. But what came out at those hearings was a lot of discussion around supply. Sometimes it was about what has to be built. The Georgia Public Policy Foundation, they presented a study that they had done last year. They indicated that 27% the cost of a new home is directly attributable to regulatory requirements. So right off the bat, over a quarter of the cost of the home is going to be because of things you have to do because government says you have to do it. Some of those are safety, and that's understood, but some of those are not. So if I'm required to build something that is, let's say, 4-sided brick, but the market is demanding something that will be affordable for a young family to start with, that's going to not be the most effective way to address that need. Not to say that it's going to be built with any less quality. The standards and the safety is something that is obviously something we would support here. But being required to build something just because it has a different look and feel is what's causing it to be more expensive and to push the boundaries up. If I'm a builder and I can only build something that right from the start is going to be 20% more expensive because of this feature, I'm only going to build what I can make a profit on. So I may be building something much larger and more inaccessible. The study committee heard from everybody from local governments to builders to the think tanks like GPPF, individuals, and they looked at everything from financing of housing to rental properties. What's causing this supply problem. Hopefully what we'll see from that is a good solid report that comes out that could lead to some potential legislation. I don't always look at things as they have to be something that tells another entity what they have to do. It may or may not be something that involves a preemption type bill, but it could also very well be something that could incentivize growth, much like we do on the economic development front.
What about streamlining some of the zoning? Because that could definitely expedite
yes.
the process. Or is anybody looking at that?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. We've had many discussions on. There are some local jurisdictions that are zoning out rentals. They're basically saying if it's a single-family residential, it will not be zoned. Well, and we have disagreement on this, but they will say it will be zoned or spot zoned, so it's only owner occupied. There's a city on the south side of Atlanta that is no longer issuing certificates of occupancy for single family construction unless you sign an agreement to never rent that property. We don't think it's constitutional. We disagree with that. But short term, it's creating a problem because in that local jurisdiction, the amount of families, when you look at census data, that live in rental property that is not multifamily, if that is no longer available to them, there's not enough 3-bedroom apartments that could accommodate them. They're going to have to move out of that jurisdiction to where they can afford to live, and then that's going to create more traffic at a greater distance as you move forward. With regard to the investors, kind of circling back to that, right now they seem to be addressing a need. It's just if that's not the long-term growth we want, then we need to find out, another way to achieve that, and that can be injecting more supply into the market.
We talked about land contracts.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit, give us some paradigm on that.
Sure, and this is something that I would say probably about half a dozen years ago, we started to see this issue rising up. It's not nearly getting as much press coverage as some of the bigger predatory practices, but this will involve a lot of times it's in lower economic communities. Someone will approach someone and say, hey, I'll do a free estimate on your roof, or I'll look. It looks like you have some windows that might be rotting. And what they'll do is they will work up a report that tells you all the kinds of things that are wrong with your house. But then they'll offer to, say, hey, we can help you finance and fix this. In effect, what they're doing is it's a very legitimate tool. It is about the most basic of contracts you could have. It is simply a contract where I now turn over my property to them and they have sold it back to me. And I pay them whatever a month. It's not a true mortgage. It is simply something where, and I take this back to kind of, you have to think of our state as, where do these laws originate? Well, back in the day, if I wanted to sell you a hayfield, I may not go to the bank and finance it. I may just give it to you in monthly installments. Once you paid the final one, then it's yours. Until then, it's mine. So it's not a mortgage. But they're setting up something very simplistic. The problem is it doesn't have the protections that you have when you have a mortgage. So there's no foreclosure process. If you are one day late on the payment, so let's say you owe it on the 1st and you pay me on the 2nd, I have no obligation to you to do anything to give you the equity that you paid. You could have paid on that property for 20 years. I simply could say, well, the terms of our contract are that you missed your payment. You were late. It's now my property, and I could evict you. And so it is a very, obviously non-consumer friendly, but a very predatory practice. And it's something done in a way that is intentional. And so it is the difficulty in addressing the issue is you don't want to say you can't have a contract, a very simplified contract for this, because there's still a legitimate reason, especially when you go out to rural parts of the state, or someone transferring title to one of their children for some land, something like that. However, it's the predatory practice that we'd be focusing on, the misleading portion of it. It almost is akin to kind of what we saw in the early 2000s with mortgage fraud, where I'm misleading you into something, and now I'm looking to profit off of your lack of understanding of or sophistication in the process.
What can be done about it? That sounds pretty serious.
Sure, it's like I said, it's not something that's very widespread, but when it happens to a grandma and she loses her house, or just anyone really, um, it's a problem. And what we have seen in the drafts on this have been attacking the misleading and misrepresentation part of it. I think a lot of it could be addressed in Title 10 in some of the consumer protections in the unfair trade practices. We've looked at different versions. The problem is that it's just like I said before, you have to demonstrate that there's a harm out there. You have to demonstrate that there's a need to fix something. I think we have seen enough of these occurrences, and that coupled with some of the other predatory practices. What I would hope is that we can find a way to address those almost as a whole, rather than have to define each one separately out. Because I think once you start doing that, the more laws you create, the more potential you have for unintended consequences, and that's always something we want to avoid. We'll be the first to say there may be a bill that we support, and in the hearing process, we realize the problems it could create. That will be something that we then will go back to the drawing board rather than push forward on something that we know will create more problems. And so that's what's happened in the past on some of these. But I think we are reaching an area where there's a growing consensus that we need to address some of these problems before they get out of hand.
I attended a couple of meetings recently at the Commercial Board of Realtors, and one was, and also at CCIM meetings, and the head of the Atlanta Fed was at the CCIM, the last CCIM meeting, lunch, and he's going to be on the show, by the way, in January, and he said, and as did the head of the economics department at Kennesaw State University,
Okay.
that we're heading into a recession. And the recession is going to last a full year. Both men said the same thing. And do you have any paradigm on that, and anything that you'd like to tell realtors and homeowners?
Sure. And this is an area that we so the way our structure is set up with the realtors, our advocacy section has an economic policy section. We also have a legislative side. So we deal with, I kind of describe it as the long-term policy and the direct short-term policy of bills, ordinances, things that are happening right now. On the most of the economists that I follow and that I've heard speak on this issue will basically say we're going to know we entered a recession well after we've entered it, which is how because you always have to look backward to see that. But they said, what does that mean? We currently have job growth, and we currently have an inadequate supply of housing. Though we may be entering a recession, and though we obviously have inflation, it's not going to be something like we've seen before. So when you go back to 2000, 2008 and 9, and how long it took us to come out of that, I think it took almost 8 years to get back to the some of the houses to get the value that they to get back on track where they would be. At that point in time, we had an oversupply of housing, and really it was an oversupply in the wrong areas. What was happening is we saw migrations coming in because of honestly, one of the studies I saw was showing how high rents in some of the most populous cities, New York, San Francisco, led to people migrating jobs from those areas into Atlanta, Arizona, Charlotte, some of the places where we saw the highest overproduction of homes. And it was because there was a large influx that wasn't a steady influx. What we're seeing now in Georgia is a steady influx. We're seeing people moving to the state. Part of it was we stayed open. We were more open during the pandemic. So a lot of people relocated here, but it also was on top of a trend that had already been going for a decade, which is job growth here, companies moving here, relocating here. So I don't have a fear that we're going to re-experience what we did in the housing market as we did back then. And also much similar to looking back into the 70s even. We have job growth with inflation, not decline with inflation. And so I would venture to say, and I think we're seeing this now, there is a cooling in the market, but much of the cooling is also attributable to the supply problem. When the last time I heard Lawrence Yun speak, he's the economist for the National Association of Realtors, he was pointing out that if you look at home sales over last year, when you looked at 21 over 20 and 22 over 21, it looked like we had a drop in home sales in the different sectors. The different 100 to 200,000, 200,000 to 300,000. Well, some of that was because those properties just didn't exist anymore. You couldn't buy a house under 200,000. So of course there was a significant drop in the less than 200,000. But when you also looked at the number of homes sold, you had to take into account it was because what was available. When we only have days supply, not months supply of housing, I'm not going to be able to find a house. So I'm not going to have a sales, one more sale to go into that statistic. But when you look at how many people, if they could find the home they were looking for, would move, that number remains high. And the more jobs we're creating, Bryan County is going to see 8,500 jobs come to them just for the Hyundai plant alone. And then on top of that, with their suppliers and the others that are going to follow, you're going to have exponential, migration to that part of the state, into that county. And right now, there is not enough housing to even have the demand they had before they announced that. And that county is one that has what we would consider some of the extreme requirements on what you're allowed to build and what they put into their zoning requirements. So some of those things are going to have to change. They're going to have to be adapted to be able to maintain the level that we have. But I don't think you're going to see a significant drop or people going underwater with their mortgages like you did in the mid 2000s, simply because the values should be pretty stable because of the demand. And our weakness on that front is helping the valuation stay a little stronger.
Lynn, what's your paradigm on that? Because we are heading into a recession. Almost everybody thinks that. And how's that going to affect your work as a commissioner of real estate?
Well, before I had this job, I was in the job. My business was selling land predominantly at auction. And Jeff is telling it just exactly like it is. Back then, there was not demand. And now, just go up and down the interstates in Georgia, and you'll see factory warehouses, particularly after warehouse. I do give a lot of that credit to that, of course, to our economic development effort in the state and what has been done with our ports and the network of ports that we've had. As you said, Lou, we're going to be talking about that on another show coming up. But Georgia is so blessed to have this over demand, but it's going to take some real management by our government. So far, that has been very effective. What we have to be very careful about is just not having any houses, because builders are scared to death that something's going to happen and those houses aren't going to be out there. So it's a real dance and what we do, we regulate licenses. And we have had, over the last 3 years, a tremendous number of people getting in the real estate business. That has slowed up somewhat as the number of licenses have slowed up. Then you have to have appraisers, and that's why we have the appraisers under our board as well. The banks have to have appraisers so they can evaluate how much money they can loan on houses. All of that comes into play, and with all those market forces happening, then the job that Jeff has with the Georgia Association of Realtors becomes so important, because the laws that govern all that becomes so important. And we're blessed to have such an amazing history of individuals in the legislatures, House and the Senate, and organizations that support those, such as the Georgia Association of Realtors, the National Association of Realtors. These people are helping us to understand what's going on in the market and to understand the regulation of the market better. So it helps me to talk to you, Lou, and to talk to and listen to these professionals like Jeff, who was our third commissioner as the real estate commissioner. He was here in my seat, and he has taken that experience and used that, and we're all gaining from his experience. That's why you and I are so blessed to have him here on this show today. I really appreciate that.
And Lynn, I would like to end this show with you guys giving your advice to realtors going into 2023 about selling real estate in a recessionary type environment. What kind of advice would you guys offer our agents who are watching and who will hear this show, which is a lot of them? Who wants to go
Ben,
first?
you want to go first, or how do you want to handle it? Okay.
I'll start with Jeff. You and Lou both know how important the financing of a large purchase like a home is. And what we all have to be careful about is having a real estate agent involved, if possible, that is knowledgeable along those lines as well, and is connected and can help guide someone that's looking for a home into the financing of it. It's such a big piece of the pie as far as buying a home. And where we see people get in trouble is getting too excited about buying a house, or not excited enough, or whatever, and jumping into something when things are subject to change in a pretty limited period of time as far as financing goes. So I would encourage that.
I would add on to that. Lynn's right. This is a huge undertaking. Realtors are used to transactions on a daily basis. This is what they do. But when you're buying the house, you're not doing this all the time. This is something few and far between. And it is a scary process. For most, it's the largest transaction they have in their life. It's where their savings is. It's where their retirement is for many Americans. And the job of the realtor is to be the professional, to be competent, and to understand the environment of what's going on. So whether it's a recession or whether we're seeing just a crazy market like we've been in where it's bidding wars, the difference doesn't change. Now, the how you handle each step of it does, but the difference doesn't change. You're there as the professional in the process to know what's going on, how to guide them through that process, and represent them in their best interest in your capacity. So, if someone were to say, what's the best thing I can prepare for, going into what we know is a recession year, let's say, I would say find some education that can give you, kind of at least a nugget of understanding of what you might need to be watching for. If you're in areas where you are seeing some strange activity, some of these predatory practices, find some classes and learn about that. Learn about what to look for. With some of these, what we have done is we have sent out surveys to some of our members saying, if you see anything that looks like this, let us know. And that's how we've been able to realize how widespread some of these things are, and offer some suggestions back to them of where to take this. What are the appropriate authorities to take some of the bad things that you might see going on? Where do you take that? And so being knowledgeable and being confident in your area of practice is critical. I've known a lot of people. I've worked for, a lot of people with our association that have weathered the storms of recessions going back to the 70s and, into the 80s, and the recession that was in the 90s and the mid 2000s. It's not whether you're in a recession or not. It's how you handle it and how you drive that ship. Knowing where to navigate and how to steer it is the job of the professional. And I'd say that would be the best advice you could give anyone.
Thank you, Jeff. It's a great honor to have you on the show. Appreciate that. And
it's an honor to be on with you, too. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And, of course, Lynn, awesome, as always, to have you on the show, and your wonderful job that you do over there as our sheriff for real estate sheriff.
Thank you, sir.
And we've got the two real estate sheriffs on here, so the current one and the previous one. So awesome stuff. And again, thank you for your time and the generosity of your time to come on the show. And again, thanks for watching. And again, my website is atlantacommunityprofiles.com. This show is on that site, and we'll be sending it out to all the realtors as well. So again, I'm Lou Wieland, and my area of business is with KW Commercial. I sell commercial real estate. I help people buy and lease office space and invest in commercial property, land, and multifamily. Thank you very much for watching, and have a nice day.